Hello, everyone. I'm Bridger DeVille, President of the International Map Industry Association. Thank you for joining us from around the world for the fourth installment in our series where cartography meets industry. Today's discussion on geoethics features leaders from our affiliate organizations, British Cartographic Society, Cartography and Geographic Information Society, and the International Cartographic Association. We thank them and their organization's members for joining us today. For those of you not familiar with our organization, IMIA is dedicated to connecting the business of maps worldwide. Our member companies and board leadership span the globe, serving as one collective voice advocating for the growth and success of the international mapping industry. Through our communications and events, IMIA fosters the exchange of ideas and information, education of industry trends and developments, and access to a global network of industry leaders. We invite you to join us. You can learn more about IMIA and our membership options at www.imiamaps.org. Events like today are only made possible with the support of our members and sponsors. On your screen is a list of our dedicated annual sponsors who have provided financial support and industry expertise to help build our organization. We are grateful for their continued support. Lastly, before our program begins, please take note of these additional IMIA events occurring this year. April 17th, an industry social at Stanford's in London. June 7th and 8th, the Mapping Leaders Forum in Denver, Colorado. And our collective stand at the Frankfurt Book Fair in October. We hope you'll join us for one of those. Okay, there's a lot to cover today, so please remember to keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off for the first portion of our event. We will have a Q&A segment after all of our speakers have presented. At that time, we ask you to either raise your hand with the raise your hand button found under your reaction on the Zoom screen, or simply write your question in the chat box. Remember, after the first portion of our event, we will break into small networking groups so you can continue the conversation with our speakers and each other. I would now like to welcome our moderator for today's panel, Mark Cygan, Director of National Mapping at Esri. Mark has supported IMIA for many years, is currently an IMIA advisory board member, and led our Geo-Ethics workshop at the Mapping Leaders Forum in Denver last summer. Thank you for being here today, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Bridger, and thanks everyone here for joining us. I think we're going to have an exciting day here looking at geoethics and mapping. Let me switch screens here. There we go. We've got an exciting panel and a number of things to kind of update you on for what's been going on in the last year or so. Geoethics in mapping has really quickly accelerated in the past year. There've been a lot of things going on in the last, let's say, 10 years in geoethics, just in geo in general, but there wasn't really anything in specific to mapping and cartography. So there's been an effort by a number of cartographic and mapping associations, including the ones that are here today, and we're very pleased to have our affiliates here. And in the last year, there's been a number of things that have gone on, and we want to try and cover that in the first half hour here with our distinguished panel, which I'll introduce in just a minute, and kind of go through what some of those are to get you up to speed. Then we'll kind of have a question and answer period to get any questions from you on this topic. And that'll take us to the end of the first hour, and then the second hour will be the breakout sessions where we can really get together and kind of network and talk more in depth about this. So very excited about this and the collaboration that's happened with this group. They're represented by our panel here. So our first, going from left to right, Dr. Alexander Kent is an honorary reader at of Cartography and Geographic Information Science at Canterbury Christ Church University. He's a regular contributor to panel discussions on ethics of cartography and is published widely. Most recently, he's been involved in the World Monument Fund and the English Heritage, and he's always seeking to advance cartography, as I've witnessed. And he served as the president of the British Cartographic Society from 2015 to 2017, and is editor-in-chief of the Cartographic Journal. and he's the chair of the International Cartographic Association Commission on Topographic Mapping, as well as some other work. I've going to do very brief bios here. So down in the lower left, you'll see there's a panelist biographies page. It's actually on the web page that you registered on, and there's more information on each of these panelists. Our next panelist there is Daniel Cole. He's the GIS coordinator and chief cartographer for the Smithsonian Institute, and he's worked in that position for over 30 years. He's designed and created maps for multiple exhibits at many of the Smithsonian museums, and he's published many books and publications. In spring of 2022, Dan became the president of the Cartographic and Geographic Information Society, or CAGES. And along with Dan is Kari Craun, who's the executive director of the CAGES. And Kari retired from her position as director of the National Geospatial Technology Operations Center at the U.S. Geological Survey in December of 2019, after 36 years of serving in federal government in geospatial positions. Kari is also the trustee of the foundation of the board for American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing, and very pleased to have Kari in her role as the director, the executive director of CAGES. We also have my colleague on the far right there, Dr. Aileen Buckley. Aileen is a senior product manager or engineer on the Living Atlas team at Esri, and her work focuses on determining and sharing best practices for mapping and analysis with modern GIS. She publishes widely and presents worldwide with many aspects of mapping and GIS. She has a number of books and articles. And Aileen is also the former president of CAGES, and she's also currently the U.S. The representative to the International Cartographic Association lead delegate for the United States. And as Bridger mentioned, I'm the director of national mapping solutions here at Esri, which means basically I'm working with national mapping and geospatial authorities for land, sea, and air. And I've been in this business for about 40 years. I'm also on the advisory. I'm also participating in the United Nations Committee of Experts on Geospatial Information Management. So again, there's more information on the website if you'd like that. What I'd like to do is have each of our panelists turn on their cameras, and we'll kind of get started with the program here. So thanks again to all of our panelists. And what we would like to do again is just kind of go through what's happened last year to get the audience up to speed on that. And then we'll look at a discussion from the panel. And then we'll end with, I forgot to mention that, we'll end with kind of what's the path forward. So that the so what when we get done with this hour. So first, let's try and make sure everyone's familiar with what's been going on. I'll start with Dr. Kent. Alex, if you'd like to start us off here.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Mark. Great introduction. Really great to be here as well as an affiliate representing the BCS. And I think one of the key things to bear in mind with all of this is what is so nice here is that we see this as a very much a collaborative event and a collaborative thing when we're talking about ethics, because we all have different perspectives and we can all learn to take these forward. And I think one of the contributions, perhaps one of the early contributions that the British Cartographic Society made was to really to sit down and kind of formulate what we thought would be a very inclusive and wide-ranging and pragmatic approach to how we would see ethics in the cartographic sphere. So cartographers that were making maps, making globes, making virtually anything to do with maps that are part of the British Cartographic Society, our members, we wanted to develop some guidelines which basically then they could follow no matter what they were making. And that was one of the key things for us. What I did very early on, well, it seems like very early on, it's a long time ago now, in 2018, was to really then try and understand what other organizations were doing that were sort of related to cartography. And at that time, looking at, say, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors in the UK, the Architects, the Royal Geographical Society, with the Institute of British Geographers, and the Chartered Society of Designers, to then come up with these 5 principles of honesty, integrity, competence, respect, responsibility, which we go into in a bit more detail on the website, so you can have a look at those and what they mean. But we want to kind of establish these guidelines before anything else. If you go ahead, Mark, to the next slide, I'll explain that a little bit more. Oh, thanks, Don has put it in the chat, so you can have a look. That's great. So what started all this off, and I think that's probably quite important to bear in mind. I was thinking at the time, as president of the British Cartographic Society, what is going to actually distinguish professional cartographers of the future? So in the past, we could say, well, it's really their aesthetic standards. So you could have confidence in the design of the maps that perhaps a professional cartographer could create, because they would be created well, and largely they would be aesthetically appealing, and they would use the language of cartography through aesthetics to basically convince and to persuade an audience. And with the advance of software capabilities, it was really then a shift that I saw started to happen, because of course more and more people could design more maps, whoever they were, really, to ever increasingly and ever higher standard, certainly an aesthetic standard. So therefore it wasn't really going to be aesthetics anymore that was going to divide, if you like, the professional from maybe the amateur cartographers, at least those that we wanted perhaps to see as members of a society that would want to uphold the profession. So when we were looking at this code of ethics, we wanted kind of nurture integrity and really to uphold ethical standards of our members of that Cartographic Society. So at this stage, you know, hand on heart, it wasn't really about trying to create something for the whole of cartography. It was more about for the ethics of cartographers within the society as we know it, of the British Cartographic Society. So basically, what are our values that we expect our members to uphold? And again, it was left pretty broad in terms of dictating what we thought what map was. We don't actually mention map in the ethical guidelines. It's more about the behavior that we'd expect the cartographers to have, whatever the product was that they were making. This was ratified by BCS Council in 2018, so fairly early on. And then it's been revised since to incorporate what we call a code of conduct, which is more about really sort of behavior and the right approach when it comes to presenting work and effectively socializing at conferences and what that means. So again, much more of a sort of a practical line, but a code of conduct then appended, if you like, that core code of ethics. But that was the start of where we were going with this, very much as a society, and thinking about how we could professionalize cartography for the future. So I hope, Mark, that gives you an idea of what we were doing at that early time.
That's great. That's perfect, Alex. I really think it's kind of sets the stage, and I applaud the British Cartographic Society for kind of, being on the forefront of that. There has been a number of other activities going on in the broader geo world, as well as in mapping. And I want to turn it over to Dan Cole and kind of help us understand kind of where things have been going in some of the other areas. Dan?
Okay. Last June, there was a number of us who were invited to go to Santa Barbara for Geo-Ethics get-together. But before that, there was a series of Geo-Ethics webinars, and you can see some of them listed below, and we'll get to and all of these that are on the slideshow. I believe the slides will be provided afterwards. You can click on any one of those topics, and all those are recordings of the webinars that occurred before the summit. Go to the next slide.
Yep. I think that one goes to Aileen. So I don't know if there's more you want to talk on that.
I was going to say a few other things, but from the summit that we had last June, we then published a paper last September on geoethics, and that should have been one of the slides as well. And yeah, Donna just posted it in the chat. And within that, we're dealing with ethical design for geospatial technology for research of human and animal behavior. For humans, dealing with knowing the difference between informed consent versus just simply user consent. And when it comes to animal studies and biogeography, it's important to identify places that you actually have to hide to some degree when you're mapping them to prevent looting of potentially endangered species or poaching of them or looting of archaeological sites, et cetera, along those lines. And that's what that all came down to. As cartographers who actually work in the field, it's important to establish, your collections ethics. Like I said before, providing informed consent. When it comes to actual mapping, it's important to have identifying exactly where things are versus things that need to be, as I mentioned before, hidden to some degree or fuzzed out so that people can't identify where to go to loot them. Anyway, you can go to the next person.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. And we'll be hearing more from Kay just a little bit later. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Aileen Buckley. Aileen, maybe you could take us through the next things that were happening last year.
Right. So earlier last year, we published a blog post on the Esri ArcGIS blog, and it was called Mapmaker's Mantra. This was in response to a question that Jack Dangerman, the president, CEO of our company, had been asked at the user conference in July. And it really had to do a lot with the change in the mapping industry and business, which, well, this particular society in IMIA will know a whole lot about. I mean, there were a number of us who remember the times when the cartographer was in the back room and it was done by scribe coats and photographic overlays, and the person who was making the map was a highly trained individual who had received special education and training or had been through a training program.
Zoom meeting right now on
Land, could you mute, please? Thank you. Sorry about that.
It's okay. I think some of us do remember those days, but things have changed so radically. Today, maps are ubiquitous, and Alex alluded to this. They're ubiquitous and they're becoming central to important decision making. But now the data to make maps is largely available. There were days when we have to spend, there were times when we had to spend days and days scrounging the data, getting the data into a cartographic friendly mode of use. So the data are there, there's more data, it's easy to access, it's often free. The tools to make the maps are much more advanced now. They're often available, they're sometimes free. And the way that we create the tools makes it so easy for people to make the maps. They're not tools like Scribers where you had to spend hours and hours learning how to not scratch through that film. Now you can click a few buttons, and at the end you have an authoritative looking map that you may know nothing about. And it came from data that you didn't really explore. It came from operations and tools that you really didn't understand, but the end product is still something that could be very believable. So times have changed, and Esri felt responsibility to reach out and say, there are responsibilities that you have with this great power of mapping. And so we wrote the Mapmaker's Mantra. And after that, you can advance, Mark, we started undertaking some discussions, and they lasted the whole year long. And it started just about a year ago, a little over a year ago, at the American Association of Geographers meeting. And in fact, we just had another panel session at the latest one that was held here. The panel was held just on Sunday. But we started the discussions, and this was just to explore the interest in the concept of developing perhaps something like a code of ethics. And we brought, again, people from multiple societies, multiple places to talk about it. And you can see some of those folks here. You can advance, Mark. Oh, and I was the moderator for that. That spun out into some different kinds of publications, of references to things that we were doing. One of them was this GIM International article from Menno Jan Krak, who is a past president of the International Cartographic Association, talking about how I think most of us would agree that the precepts in the Mapmaker's Mantra are something that we want to follow, but how do we actually put them into action? And his article described some ways where we could make annotations on notes, describe the projection, the implications of the projection, describe the classing methods and the implications of those classing methods, the sources of data, trying to provide transparency and a learning opportunity while people were looking and trying to make use of the map. You can carry on to the next one. And from that, it was again referenced. For example, there were multiple references to it, but again, Menno Jan used that as a springboard to talk about some of his ideas in a presentation that was made at the ISPRS meeting in June. I believe, Mark, you're going to carry on from here.
Thank you. All right, and a lot of those ideas that came from those early meetings, we carried into June of last year in the International Map Industry Association's Mapping Leaders Forum. And Aileen kind of gave us a briefing similar to what she just did. And then we broke out into roundtables and we talked about these discussions. The outcomes of that workshop was to craft a IMIA statement of ethics for the mapping industry. So I won't read this, but we tried to keep it very succinct. As you think about geoethics, there are a lot of facets, but the most important thing is to boil it down to some very simple principles. One of the things we haven't talked about, but has kind of been the undercurrent, we kind of got an agreement early on that it was going to be the carrot, not the stick. We were going to encourage geoethics, but we're not going to try and enforce it. And so we actually tried to put out some very positive, succinct statements here that kind of incorporated some of the thinking that was going into it. The purpose of this statement was to make a statement for IMIA, but also contribute to the broader community of the folks you're seeing here today and others in ongoing conversation to continue this. And we'll come back to that with Aileen, I think, if you want to pick up the conversation again here.
So by now we had a couple of in-person meetings, and we decided in early February, as we were putting together the Mapmaker's Mantra, that this would be a conversation that we should carry on at the user conference. So we had two sessions at the user conference back to back. The first was, again, a panel where we could have open discussion, and there were some new faces at the table this time. There was the UNGGIM Interregional Advisor, Greg Scott. There was Deirdre Dalpiaz Bishop from the Census Bureau. And then some of the more familiar faces from the past couple of discussions. So this was then followed by, if you want to advance, Mark, and we had Alan Carroll as our moderator. We had then this session, which was recorded, and you're able to find it on our website, and there is a link that we can provide to you. And then in the next one, Mark. Wait, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I went too fast.
Yeah, that's okay. And then there was this, not so much a panel discussion, but a discussion amongst colleagues, both in our education team and in our mapping teams, to talk about the ethics of making maps. And so we tried to continue carrying on the conversation so that we could bring the user conference community into the discussions. And then, if you carry on, in September of last year, the International Cartographic Association Executive Committee elected amongst themselves to create a working group on ethics in cartography, and they asked me if I could chair that for them. That working group is dedicated to trying to advance the development of some precepts. I'm not sure if it's going to be called a code of ethics, but some precepts for ethical map making, and then carry it on after an initial release to other areas of mapping, maybe map curatorship, the business of maps, as Mark was talking about with the IMIA. And there is a proposal now to turn that into a full-on ICA commission that will be voted on at the International Cartographic Association General Assembly in August of this year. And we'll carry on. We then had Eurocarto, and Eurocarto was in September. We again had an open discussion. It sounds like we're still talking amongst ourselves, but what was really happening at almost all of these open discussions is that the audience was totally engaged and shared more than the panelists did. So it was really an open, really open discussion that allowed the audience to provide us with their personal experiences, thoughts, observations, ideas. And so I've furiously been writing all these things down, and we will soon I'll be writing a white paper to provide some overview of all that stuff. And we had Tim Trainer as the moderator of that session. Then we carried on to the NACIS, North American Cartographic Information Society annual meeting, and we had not a full panel session, no, but we had a couple of people that included me and Steve Holloway, who had written, for those who are familiar with him, something called Right Map Making, which was a 5-point manifesto on sort of the ethics of map making, but from a beautifully poetic point of view. He had things to say like, thou shalt not map that which should not be mapped, which I think we would all say it makes sense to us as an ethical precept, but he said it in such a beautiful way. And then I think we can go to Kari to talk about the next event that took place.
Yeah, that's great. And so we do have one more really important topic here, but I just want to remind people, if you've got questions, we are going to open that up in a few minutes for question and answers. Please put your questions into the chat and we'll get to those. However, I want to have Kari present on kind of the culmination of all of these activities at the Autocarto. So Kari, maybe you can kind of share some of the experience there.
Okay, sure. So we've been talking a lot about conversations that have been happening throughout the last couple of years. And there have been some very specific discussions. We wanted to really dive deeply into a lot of these areas. And this is a very broad topic, and there's a lot of different ways you can slice it. But at our Autocarto 22 conference, we specifically focused on ethics and mapping, and we divided the topics into integrity, inclusion, and empathy. But as you'll see, we can go to the next slide, Mark. In the program, you can get a feel for some of the specific topics here in the sessions. So we've got the big plenaries, inclusion, integrity, and empathy, but then we get into some very specific discussions, and you can get a feel for some of those topics in the names of these sessions. All of this information, so here's the really good part, and if you take nothing else away from what I'm saying, take this away. If you go to this URL, which is on the CAGIS website, cartogis.org, and look under Autocarto 2022, you can find all of the abstracts, all of the presentations, and video recordings of all of the sessions from the conference online. I went back and looked at some of these presentations, and they are fabulous. So, you can look through the slides if you just want to get a feel for, what this topic is. But then if you really want to get to the discussion around that, you can view the video and get, questions and answers from the audience. Such a wide variety of topics. Everything from social networks and GeoAI, topics like deep fake geography. So just a wide variety of topics here. And I think the great thing here is that you get into some very specific examples. We've talked about bringing the ethics and a code of ethics to a very general level. But at least for me, I need to see some specific examples and discuss specific examples and derive the more general information from that. So, you can All of this is freely available. Also, we'd love to have you as a member of CAGIS, but you don't have to be. So you can go on this website and get all of this information. Okay, next session, next slide. And this is just going to show you, we also had a workshop at the conference, and very similar to some of these other workshops. Of course, the discussion is really valuable, but a lot of the same folks giving background on what's been discussed and written about this topic. Okay, next slide. And here are our panelists, a few new folks involved. Next slide, and I believe that's Tim. Tim was again the moderator. So I do invite you and encourage you to go look at that material on the website. It's great. There's a lot of good stuff there. And I'll turn it back over to Aileen.
Right. So the latest thing that happened was just Sunday. And again, it was an open discussion, but this was again at the American Association of Geographers meeting, but the discussion was so different this time because it really focused on how to bring this topic of ethics into education, primarily at the university level. And how do we introduce it? How do we get people engaged with it? How do we get people on the faculty to accept it as part of what they need to bring into their curriculum? And what did the audience have to share with us in terms of things that we could bring forward? From this came a very, we had already heard this at other panels in the past, but from this came a very good example of exactly what Kari was just talking about, a way to bring it forward primarily through case studies and providing people with examples of where students might, as professionals, run into ethical issues. What are the possible solutions? What are the ways to navigate through the decision-making process? How do you know if you've made the right decision in the end? What are the ramifications and implications of those decisions? And trying to present this at a level where it would be somewhere within the university curriculum, could be anywhere from the freshman to the graduate level. And we had an excellent panel, but the audience again was the primary driver of the discussion. So if you advance to the next slide, we were super, super lucky to have Barbara or Babs Buttonfield from University of Colorado be our discussant. She is a deep thinker. She had examples that she uses with her class, and the audience was invigorated, enthused, energetic. It was 8:30 in the morning on Sunday, and we couldn't stop people from talking. And I really kind of hope that's where we are here with this group of people at IMIA. We've spoken before with them in the Mapping Leaders Forum that Mark mentioned earlier, but I really think that this is now coming to a point where we can have some discussion that leads to action. And so Mark, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Aileen, and thanks to all of our panelists. I think it's a great overview, and you guys all kept your time, so I appreciate that. And we're going to now move into our question and answer time. So again, we invite you to put your questions into the chat, and we will we'll address those as we can. And let's see, I'm just looking through the chat. I don't see any questions right now. Donna, please direct me if I'm missing one.
Just popped one in there for Alex.
All right, great. Let's see. So yeah, Alex, this is for you. So do you feel that we, meaning all the global organizations, are on the path you envisioned when you first were drafting the BCS Code of Ethics? It seems that we've gained a lot of steam since 2018.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you never know, do you? You never know how things are going to pan out or whatever. But I think one of the key things for me is the interest that this has drawn. I mean, we've really seen an explosion of interest. But one of the most helpful directions that this whole series of debates has gone into, I think, well, two directions maybe. One is that it's broadened out and enriched the discussion and enlarged our vocabulary in terms of when we're talking about ethics, you know, so people get used to the kind of the language that we're using, the terminology, so that gets advanced. But I think the other thing, which is really, really useful, the other direction, is the drive towards practical case studies to illustrate what on earth this actually means when we're approaching a particular problem, a particular map-making dilemma, if you like. What are the possible options and what are the outcomes? And again, when I was devising the Code of Ethics for the PCS years ago, of course, this was all really quite vague in terms of saying, well, if you boil everything right down to these principles, then again, that should kind of cover everything. And in a way, you know, it does, but nonetheless, you still need practical case studies to go to. So you can say, well, actually, you know, this is what happened in this instance. This is how people approach this problem. This is what they did. And there is nothing better, I think, really, than learning from that experience than obviously, you know, looking at it in that particular way rather than something which is purely abstract. So I must admit, you know, when I was doing all this at the start, it was really more of an abstraction in terms of those principles. And it's great to see it going in the direction of something which is more practical. It might mean, of course, that then we boil those down, those case studies down to the same principles. But, you know, people tend to believe you when you've got that experience much more than if you've got just abstract, idealistic principles. So I think it's really, really good the way that this has gone. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Alex, for that perspective. I think that's good. Our next question comes from Sam Arundel at USGS. So I appreciate the question. And it's what are the next steps? So kind of a spoiler alert, Aileen's going to be kind of talking about this as we get to the top of the hour. But Aileen, maybe you want to just kind of prime the pump here, or just kind of what are the next steps here?
Gosh, I'm almost more comfortable talking about what I'd like to happen in the end. The steps to get there are a little bit vague to me. But what we do have planned is that we'll have this conversation. We'll have as many other conversations as we can. In the meantime, we'll have a meeting at the International Cartographic Conference. But what we'll do in the meantime, at least from the position of the working group on ethics, is to pull together the resources that we do have, the things perhaps that Alex looked at when he was trying to devise their code of ethics, the code of ethics and other statements of ethics that I've found that relate to the geospatial industry and related industries. One of the codes of ethics that I found super helpful was the Society of Professional Journalists, who are also storytellers like cartographers. And their code of ethics was really well organized, for one thing, but each of the statements had linked resources. And I think that's something that we could also provide people, are resources to start thinking about these things, links to case studies that we know about, links to articles that discuss things, links to webcasts or podcasts that people have generated around this topic. So collection of resources, sharing of those resources through a web page that's open. I really think it's critical that we get diverse and inclusive participation in this. And we need to not just sit back and wait for people to come to join the conversation. We need to reach out. We need to find the communities that are underrepresented in the conversation and allow them a voice. And so gathering resources, sharing resources, continuing the conversations, building a repository that people can look to that's reliable, believable, not authoritative, but something that people will then begin to want to share their resources into. That, I would say, is the next step we need to take.
Now that's great, Aileen. And I just want to underscore, you know, there was an event happening every 2 months last year. I mean, we had more than a half dozen events, and at every single one of them, there was an opportunity and a purpose to get input from the audience. So, you know, just reiterating Aileen's point, we had some really good input come back in. I would like to say for the International Map Industry Association, our next steps are, we've done that statement, which we hope we're contributing to the conversation. Our plan, and we've stated this publicly, is that we want to support, we want to work together, and we want to put our weight behind the work that's going on with the International Cartographic Association. We see them being in a good position to lead. The British Cartographic Society, CAGIS, are both national members of the International Cartographic Association. We want to work together going forward on that. That's our plan and our purpose, is to work with them. So then there's a question for Dan. Dan, I think you brought up, I think you piqued some interest here. And the question is, could you talk a bit more about the collections ethics? So this actually came up in our International Map Industry Association, our IMIA workshop last June, is the collection side of things. So maybe Dan, you could talk to the collections ethic about the primary categories for consideration from a standpoint of a recreation publisher. There's a lot of our members in IMIA still do a lot of field checking of maps. So maybe you can address that issue.
Well, dealing with field collections for your maps, whenever you're dealing with people, it's important to provide informed consent, identifying how you're collecting the data and how it's going to be used. And in many cases, you also need to share your database, your geodatabase back with the people that you've collected from. So that's one consideration. And then when you're collecting data, dealing with the natural world, whether it's botanical or zoological, then it's always a case of making sure that none of your map data can then be used to loot or poach any of those same objects you're trying to protect. So okay,
that's great, Dan. I think that balancing act is something that we're looking at not only for the collection side, but in other aspects here too. So yeah, that's great. Thank you, Dan. Let's see. Other questions from the audience?
There was one for Kari in the chat.
Thank you. So Kari says, thanks for directing us to the AutoCarto 2022 presentations. Can you highlight a few more that you find most relevant today and which are on the horizon or seeking further engagement from our industry?
Sure. So as I said, I kind of looked back through some of the presentations, and I was just, if you're just starting out kind of looking at this topic, one that I think was great, Li Cho Meng, and I think that's how you pronounce her name, from the Technical University of Munich, was one of the keynote speakers the keynote speaker in the second plenary session. So if you look at the website and go to that presentation, you can look through the slides or actually view the presentation. But it was great in terms of talking about the different ways of thinking about mapping and how that really relates to different ways of looking at ethics. And, she talked about normative kinds of thinking where you're thinking about, kind of integrity in terms of accuracy and how things are represented. And then looking at that maybe more subjectively and thinking about how maps are a story that we're telling and looking at it, integrity from that perspective. So I thought that was a great presentation. I didn't really appreciate it the first time I heard it, I don't think, because there's so much in there. I just really would recommend that you look at that one. One of the other ones, you're talking about industry and how and how, of course, industry is engaged throughout this. But Bo Zhao, who did a paper on deep fake geography, that was really one of the more popular papers that we've had published in the Cages Journal. But it is about satellite imagery and putting false information in satellite imagery purposefully. But it also talks about algorithms to detect that and putting those algorithms out for the public to be able to use, or whomever to be able to use to detect false information in imagery. I think things along that line, using automated approaches and making the public, having the public be able to access that kind of tool that's great. You know, I think that's wonderful and something great that the industry can provide. Another thing that was mentioned in that GIM International article, I thought was really good. It really kind of gets back to metadata, honestly, you know, metadata and, you know, even caller information, also known as metadata in the paper map world. Legends talked about documenting, you know, things like sources, obviously data sources, methodology, you know, that sort of thing as a way to inform the user of what they're looking at. And, you know, I think, you know, that's very important too, and something that cartographers, mappers can definitely do to increase the information that the user has and, you know, using that product appropriately. So those are just a few ideas.
That's great. That's
Mark,
yes.
if I could jump in, a couple other ones to mention, I think, is there was a whole session on the use and misuse of information, geographic information in social media. I found that one to be really interesting as well. Social media has driven a lot of our now recognized need to have some ethical statements about map making. And as Kari was saying, Bo helped to bring some attention to that through his research on deep fakes in satellite imagery. So that whole session 9 on the use and misuse of geographic information in social media was fantastic. But there was also a presentation by a thought leader in this field, David DiBiase, and his colleague, who we saw as one of the participants at the AAG meeting just a couple of days ago, Anthony Robinson, who runs their online geospatial education program, entitled, "Can There Be a Spatial Data Science Ethics?" And it's an interesting conversation about how they sort of view you know, their answer to that question and the steps that they've taken towards implementing a solution. So I would also point to those papers.
That's great. All right. Thank you, Aileen. We've got a question here from Neil Allen at Benchmarks, and I think it actually will kind of lead us into the last section, last portion with Aileen here. But so Neil's question is, are most other professional geo industry organizations drafting their own set of ethics or diversity, equity, inclusion policies? How do you see the overarching policies affecting or replacing them? You know, I'll quickly just jump in for the International Map Industry Association. We put out that statement of ethics, but we want to continue the conversation. I'll just reemphasize with the other organizations that are here. So we appreciate that partnership. Aileen, I don't know if you want to talk to or maybe actually let me come back to you, because I think that'll be a good transition into our path forward. But so maybe Alex for British Cartographic Society, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question again, because you know, one of the key things, I suppose, with all this is, you know, as a community, these conversations are really, really important, and you don't really want to create, you know, a multitude in a way of different organizations within the same sort of umbrella that have all the different codes of ethics and so on. I guess, you know, what is so important is when we can come together and discuss and then work out what the consensus might be, and then I suppose ultimately come up with something that fits what we think, you know, covers virtually everything that I guess we want. You know, that's, I suppose, the, you know, the way forward. I guess the difficulties are where we have I suppose different aspects of geospatial ethics that apply to different applications and uses of different technologies. That's where some of that may be more or less applicable. So, for example, within remote sensing, you're going to have perhaps a specific subset of ethics that might apply for that, as well as a different subset for cartographers and so on. So I think, given the potential diversity, I think that's why it's so essential for us to continue to discuss and talk about what is really quite a complex issue. And I think as long as we have these discussions, then we will refine what we want going forward. Because I think the key thing to remember in all of this is that ethics doesn't stand still. You know, it has to evolve as society evolves. And again, there are issues in terms of national differences when it comes to ethics and so on. So I think, again, that's why it's wholly appropriate for a body like the ICA and IMIA and so on to, serve as a facilitating sort of conduit, if you like, to bring together these conversations to ensure that they happen. Because otherwise, again, you might end up with quite a sort of set of regional ideas and differences that may or may not be so conducive. But I think, ultimately, ethics is about perspectives, and it's about changing and challenging the perspectives that we have. And so the more that we can discuss and explore what we want to do together, the better, I think. So yeah, it'd be good if we could, keep those discussions going rather than sort of, I think the worry is to kind of create silos and have lots of different ethical standards that apply, for different societies and so on. I mean, when I was starting all of this with the BCS, I wasn't envisaging, this whole topic would go in a massive sort of open direction. This was very much a kind of society-driven thing. So actually, it's really good to, have these debates to think, well, what could apply, what could be more useful to those who are actually making maps and dealing with these decisions. So I think the more we do that, the more we discuss and make things relevant, the better, really.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Alex. I think that's good points. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues at Cages. I think just for
Mark, could I just make 2 points relative to that question that Neil was posing? One is Tim Traynor said that he has, as president of the International Cartographic Association, now seen multiple national agencies, organizations start working on this. And what he said is that he would like to avoid duplication and avoid people spending time on things that together we could work on much more efficiently, and then we could spend time on other things. So that was one thing. The other thing is that I think it's really critical for our community of cartographers to make sure that whatever we develop is reflective of our industry, our science, our technology, because it is really easy to find codes of ethics out there that are written so generically they could apply to any industry, any company, any profession. And I think we really do want to make it something that as a person reads it, they'll understand that it's truly from a community of cartographers. A good example, again, is a society of professional journalists, but I have to tell you, one of the best ones, I read it. It was spot on, to the point, every point taken really well, and I knew exactly who it was for. It was the Code of Ethics for Hairdressers.
All right.
Thou shalt not use product that hasn't been tested. Thou shalt not gossip when people tell you things. And you could just read it and say, wow, that is hairdressers. And they have a code of ethics.
Aileen, I feel like that's the whole subject you could write an article on. So we'll look for that. So I do want to give Cages the opportunity. Any last thoughts here? You can address the question or just any kind of closing thoughts. What's the next step? You guys did a great job with the AutoCarto 2022. And we didn't really mention it, but that whole event was wrapped around this subject, and there's a lot of good content. So I just, as Kari said, there's good content there. But any final thoughts there? I'll start with Kari, and then we'll go to Dan.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of answer the question about whether or not we have our own set of ethics or DEI policies. So we do have a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. That's more about the composition of our membership and treatment of folks that are working with us and that are our members. And at least my opinion, in terms of developing a more overarching ethics statement, is we would certainly support and work with ICA. I think I agree. We don't want to get a lot of parallel efforts going on. I think it would be better to work together to come up with something.
That's great. Thank you, Kari. Dan, I'll give you the last one before I turn it over to Aileen.
Yeah, someone in the chat asked if we were getting ahead of the problem or just catching up to it. In my view, we're catching up to it because there are companies that are actively doing things that may have questionable ethics. some, it's important, in terms of developing, this is one thing that came out in the Geo-Ethics paper that was published last year through the AAG, protecting workers from geospatial surveillance. And one of the things that they specifically identified was Amazon's Geospatial Operating Console, or SPOC, for doing that in particular, as well as Apple's helping the Chinese geo-track their own citizenry. So, these are all things that have to be taken into consideration, and we have to, we are doing some catch up in regard to these issues.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dan. I think you bring up some good topics and things for us to think about going forward. So with that, I did say we have the investment of your time. I thank everyone for staying on. We've had basically everyone stayed on, so that's been amazing. The so what? Okay, we said we'd answer the so what question. Where are we go? How are we going forward? What's the, as Aileen's called it, the mapping the path forward. So Aileen, I'm going to turn it over to you for the ICA comment, final comment, and then if you want to talk about where we're going from here.
Yeah, I think it's time to get specific and action oriented. I think if we're going to try and devise, say, a code of ethics, do you want to call it a set of guiding principles, it's time to start articulating some of that, getting it out into people's hands and have their eyes on it. But in the meantime, I think what this group could help to do is to sort of maybe plan the next action steps towards what I would ultimately love to see, which is guidance from the International Cartographic Association that has been pulled together from multiple sources. It is inclusive. It does reflect diversity. It does reflect a consensus amongst, well, you can never have complete consensus, I don't think, but a large amount of consensus, and that would then begin to be accepted at national levels or at society levels within nations, or at, let's think big. Let's think that governments might pull some of this content into their own sorts of statements of ethics, or companies would do that, or societies would do that, or they would just refer to it. And maybe things like the United Nations would refer to it. Maybe UNGGIM points to that as the source for some of their ethical language and their direction on ethics within, the global community of geospatial information. I do think, though, that we as the group that we are here right now together, and if we expand it out, I think our particular contribution to the conversation is something that I have not seen expressed in things like what Dan was talking about, the map itself, the making of the map, the way that we have been trained or taught or come through our practice to think about maps and map making. That is language I don't see in any of the geospatial ethical conversation. And I think that's what we bring to the table. And that's what I would like us to focus on and try to provide leadership on.
Yeah. Aileen, that's great. Thank you. I think that gives us thought. I almost would want to just pause there and leave that for everyone, but I do want to let them know we've talked about this collaboration. We've talked about ICA kind of being taking a lead here. You want to give us just a little tidbit into kind of where things are going with the ICA working group on geoethics and where you see that going? Yeah.
Okay. So a working group is something that the ICA can pull together without any input from any of the member nations. But if it's developed as a commission within the ICA, which is where the work of the ICA happens, the hands-on, feet on the ground work through the ICA is done through the commissions itself. And I think that's a really good place for this to happen for ethics within the ICA, because the ICA might feel a little hamstrung, making some statements or getting involved, but the commission itself can take action that is reflective of the organization, the International Cartographic Association, but really has, they have a stand of their own. And so there's a proposal to turn this into a commission at the next General Assembly, which happens in August. And if it's voted in, then the commission itself can carry forward the work. And the other thing that's important about a commission as opposed to a working group is that, as Alex was mentioning, this needs to carry on. Times are changing. I mean, that's why it's important right now, because times have changed since those days when there was a cartographer in the back room who had been trained in ethics. But we don't have that anymore. So as technology changes, as society changes, we need to stay abreast of the subject. And I think the commission will allow us to do that. And that commission, of course, is under the auspices of the ICA. And the ICA has a memorandum of understanding with organizations like IMIA. And I think those two organizations in particular, ICA, IMIA, are the ones who can lead the charge in this area. And so there is the potential to have a workshop at the ICA meeting in August, and I think that will happen. And then it's a little easier. However, it wasn't hard. I mean, to pull all these things together in the last year, Mark, you said there was something every 2 months, and we made it happen. It wasn't that hard, but it'll be even easier through the ICA Commission.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Aileen. And I think that can lead us to our call to action, because we're running out of time. We want to move to our next hour, which is breakout sessions to get all of your input and hear from you. So, the call to action is that in the International Cartographic Conference is going to be in August. It is in South Africa, in beautiful Cape Town. And there will be this continuing conversation. The International Map Industry Association has an event on the 8th of June in Denver, Mapping Leaders Forum. Come talk, and we'll continue this conversation. British Cartographic Society has a number of events this year, virtual as well as later in September, I believe. And then the Cages always every other year has their Auto Carto. So we're looking forward to those. We thank our affiliates for joining us today. Thank you to Dr. Alexander Kent with British Cartographic Society, with Dan Cole, president of the Cartography and Geographic Information Society, and Kari Craun, who's the executive director, and Aileen for representing the International Cartographic Association. And with that, thank you all. And I'm going to turn it over to Bridger, who's going to talk about the next breakout sessions for the next hour. Bridger?
Great. Thank you, Mark. And thank you to everyone on the panel as well. That was a great discussion, and feel like we keep saying some of the same things, but we keep taking steps forward every time. So this is a really great exercise. I think Aileen's right. We're just on the precipice of taking some real defined action, and I look forward to seeing all the advancements in the coming year. Thanks again for joining us. For everyone that's still here, we're going to break out into breakout rooms and continue the discussion for a bit. You just need to hold tight and wait for an invitation pop up to join one of the rooms. Give us just a couple minutes and we'll get you into a room with our panelists and IMIA representatives.